beginning of the pandemic and have relaunched this winter. And this is our third Food Systems Hub call in our series. We are recording, and you can watch all of our previous Hub episodes on our YouTube channel, which is linked from our WSU Food Systems webpage. And thank you all for being on the call today. All of you do such important work in food systems across Washington and across the country and other regions in California. So thanks for being with us and for being here today. We are going to enter all of your names into a drawing that we'll do at the end of the call for a copy of Liz's new book. Oh, there we go, for a copy of Liz's new book, Healing Grounds. So stay on for that. You have to be in attendance to win. And with that, I'll pass it over to you, Marcia, to share a bit about our WSU Food Systems leadership team and staff, and then frame our conversation about participatory action research.
Good afternoon and welcome to all. This Food Systems Hub is being hosted by the WSU Food Systems Program. I am Marcia Ostrom, the director of the program and a professor of sustainable food and farming systems in the School of the Environment and in Extension. Our food systems team works statewide to foster sustainable food and farming systems and equitable regional food systems from farm to table. We are interdisciplinary. We include partners from outside of WSU, and we strive to integrate the extension teaching and research functions of our land-grant university. First off, we want to be sure to thank our statewide leadership committee of Diane Smith, Hannah Brous, Holly Henning-Yeager, Jen Moss, Kate Smith, Lynn Carpenter-Boggs, and Lizanne Powers-Hammond. Hopefully some of them are here with us today. And then we also wanted to introduce our staff, most of whom are here with us today. We have myself, Abba Kaiser, who has been our program and communications manager, Kate Smith, and Cristina Ocaña Gallegos. With that, we will kick off our introductions. Who's going to okay, I'm going to introduce Liz after this. First, we get to do a participatory exercise because this is all about participation. So this could be an entire course, but to sum it up, in case you haven't been exposed to ideas about participatory action research before, I just wanted to say that this has been a long-term interest of our food systems team, formerly our small farms team. We have been, since we are founded actually by legislative action back in 2000, we've been exploring approaches to community-based research and extension that honor our farmer and community partners as co-researchers and co-creators of knowledge with us, and also as co-creators of systems of inquiry and education. We are especially concerned that we don't reinforce any existing systems of domination and unequal power relationships between academic institutions and the communities we serve. So that is very brief history of how we have been interested in this topic. And I wanted to start off this way because our next two speakers will be addressing issues in participatory action research. So first we'll have Liz Carlisle, and then we'll have Linda McLean, who leads our Colville Reservation Extension Office. So we'll be able to explore these ideas further through these with these next two speakers and through conversations and questions, hopefully. So first off, we're going to talk a little bit about our own experiences. So I'm going to hand this off to Christina.
Hi, everyone. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Zoom whiteboard, but we're going to try it out. We just have a quick question for you. It's pretty interactive. And yeah, I'm just trying to share it now. So yeah, just the question is, it's not letting me share. Sorry, just usual technical difficulties.
It's always hard, even if you try it the day before or right before. You never know what might happen. Let's see, Christina, what's the
I
Is
get
it
it.
letting? Okay, great.
So yeah, you'll see a question here, and all of you can put like a little sticky note, and it will show the answers of everyone. So the question is just, have you been part of a participatory research project that involved the university or community members? And if yes, what kind of project? And to your left, you would have the tools. You can put a sticky note. It's just in your Zoom screen. So I don't know if you can see that, and you can all type in it. I see Kate is starting to type something. We appreciate all of your answers. So yeah, please share with us.
And Marcy, if you want to maybe just
Yeah,
remind, give a little more explanation, some examples that might jog people's memories or minds on it. Yeah.
Focused on trying to get something on the whiteboard. So if I go to the whiteboard function here on Zoom, where it says whiteboards, is that where I need to go?
No, it's like a shared screen, right? And so like you can already interact in my screen.
I don't think it's letting me.
No.
I don't know if anybody else is having luck. It says all participants should be able to do it. But then, oh, somebody did it.
Someone is saying, yeah, soil health project with Viva Farms.
Yeah, a lot of people are having problems. You know what we can do? People can just put their experiences in the chat.
Yes, that's perfect.
Yeah, why do people just add their experiences? This is a great idea because we thought everybody could see them at once, and we were having good luck with the Google Jamboard, so we got a little cocky and thought we could do the Zoomed whiteboard. But just write in the chat. Let's go with the old-fashioned chat system.
Yeah, and if it's new, you're not alone, but you may already have some experiences in it, as we hear a little bit more of some examples throughout from both Liz in today's call and then from Linda in next month's call.
If people try again, just I feel like I changed something and maybe that did it, but if not, chat is okay.
Yeah, we've got some responses coming in the chat. Thanks so much. And you know what I'm going to do, Christina, I can add those. So I'll just copy what folks have added in. So we can see what kind of experiences we've got.
And Kate, maybe while you're doing that, we should just go ahead and introduce Liz, and people can keep adding things while we're talking.
Sure. Yep. That sounds great. So let's see, Christina, I can keep adding in a moment. I'm gonna screen share again, and we'll move on in our conversation. And yeah, keep adding things to the chat box, and I can add it, and maybe we can share at the end. But it's always helpful to hear people's experiences so far, and if they're new concepts, it's excellent because we get to share in spaces like this. So, Marcia, I'll pass it back over to you.
So I'm going to go ahead and welcome and introduce Liz Carlisle so that we can get on with our conversation. Liz is an assistant professor in the environmental studies program at UC Santa Barbara, where she teaches courses on food and farming. She was born and raised in Montana. She got hooked on agriculture while working as an aide to an organic farmer and also U.S. Senator John Tester. She's written 3 books about regenerative farming and agroecology: Lentil Underground, that we read from my agroecology class, Grain by Grain, and most recently, and the book we'll be discussing today, is called Healing Grounds, Climate Justice and the Deep Roots of Regenerative Farming. Liz is also a frequent contributor to both academic journals and media outlets, focusing on food and farm policies, soil health practices, and supporting new entry farmers. She holds a PhD in geography from UC Berkeley and a BA in folklore and mythology from Harvard. Prior to her career as a writer and academic, she spent several years touring rural America as a country singer. So we can take down the screen sharing now. So Liz and I talked about, when we talked about her coming to speak, she said she would prefer that we had a conversation. So we got together some questions that I'm going to ask her that she's going to discuss with me. So the first question we thought of was about the title of her book. We are curious why she chose the words healing grounds and the words regenerative farming and deep roots. And we asked if she could talk a little bit about what do you mean by these words and why did you choose them for the title of your book?
Awesome. Yeah, well, thank you so much for inviting me. And it's great to be here with a bunch of folks. It was really cool to see in the chat some of the collaborative and participatory projects you all have been involved in, and super exciting to be here with a bunch of UC Santa Barbara folks as well. So cross-pollinating across California and Washington, our food systems communities. Yeah, so, as you mentioned, I've been involved in this world of sustainable, organic, regenerative agriculture for about a dozen years. And, what really brought me to it at a deep level, when I'm honest with myself about why I chose this career path, is that my grandmother lost our family farm in the Dust Bowl. And she was a really influential person in my life, somebody I really admired. I was lucky to have her around until I was 30 before she passed. And I just really admired this strong land connection that she had from, growing up on land, having a land-based livelihood, even though things changed for her as a young woman. She ultimately became a teacher and she did live in more urban spaces. She just always sustained that land connection wherever she was. And it seemed to me like she was this really wise and grounded person, and that part of that had to do with this deep tie that she had to land. And I really wanted that for myself. And at the same time, she was really honest with me about that tragedy of the Dust Bowl as she experienced it. Knowing that her father had overplowed that land they were on in Western Nebraska, hadn't gotten good advice from the US government agents, to keep rolling that moldboard plow over that pretty fragile prairie. And so I was also interested in, how do we learn how to take better care of land, of soil health, in ways that could maybe avert those kinds of tragedies like the Dust Bowl that my grandmother experienced? And, the older I got, the more layers of this challenge I came to understand, to ask questions about, why my grandmother's family was out there in Western Nebraska anyway, as relatively recent European settlers, not really understanding the land that they were trying to steward a farm on, trying to manage it the way they would have a farm in Europe that was, rainier and things like that. And so I've noticed that a lot of other people in our field, even though a lot of times day to day, we talk about soil health, we talk about carbon sequestration, maybe we nerd out on like particular microbes that we're really into or something. At the base of why we're all here is some form of healing that we're all seeking for the land and for our communities, and a food system in which we all make each other better, where there's this kind of mutual flourishing. And so I just wanted to be really explicit about that in starting this project, that's what I was interested in learning about. And I went out and found 4 women in particular who could really speak to that deep layer of rebuilding reciprocal relationship with land and among our communities as part of the work that they're all doing in regenerative agriculture, rebuilding soil health as practitioners and researchers.
So how would you define the deep roots of regenerative farming?
Yeah, and what I'm indicating with that term is that, again, whether you identify with regenerative agriculture or organic or sustainable or climate smart, all of these practices and approaches that are now, clearly being identified as really important in the face of the climate crisis and a lot of other challenges we all face, have deep roots in indigenous farming systems from around the world for thousands of years on this continent, throughout the Americas, the African continent, the Asian continent. These kinds of practices, cover cropping, utilizing perennials, regenerative grazing, have all been utilized by indigenous communities as the kind of basis of not only the food system, but of lifeways. So the deep roots of regenerative farming are in those indigenous food systems. And then also what I learned in researching this book is that they've been really important in the last few hundred years in the face of an incredibly extractive food system that, is a tool of colonization and industrialization, that these indigenous communities, many of them in diaspora in the United States, have continued to refine these regenerative practices as part of a struggle for liberation and sovereignty. And so those deep roots of regeneration have to do with all those cultural and social ties and the importance of understanding how power relationships play into all of this as well.
Thank you. So changing gear just a little bit, we are curious about, getting back to our topic of the day, how you went about making this a participatory research project when you were getting the information you needed for this book.
Yeah, I think I first heard this term participatory action research in my first year as a graduate student at Berkeley. And it was incredibly compelling to me from the beginning because I had come to Berkeley having worked in the tester office in the US Senate for this US Senator who is an organic farmer. And I'd been inspired to go to graduate school by having all these interactions with people in Montana who were part of the organic farming movement. And I knew that I wanted to do some kind of a project with them. And I didn't know exactly what it meant to do research with a community. I had a kind of a foggy notion that I had gotten these invitations to go see these farms while I was working this job in DC. And I wanted to take people up on them. I wanted to see what they were doing. People were saying, I'm utilizing this crop rotation and this is the impact, or I've implemented cover cropping and this is what I'm seeing. You should come out and see this. And these were folks who had policy ideas. And so that was why they were like, see for yourself, how powerful these things are. I wanted to do that. I wanted to go out, see these farms, understand the underlying ecology, but also understand the story of how people had built economic systems and knowledge systems, everything it takes to change a cropping system. Because in fact, on thousands of acres, people had gone from monocultural wheat farming supported by chemicals to diversified rotations and marketing in the organic sector. So we all know that's not an easy transition. So I was also interested in the story of how everybody pulled that off. But I didn't know what it meant to do participatory research. I just knew that my values were reciprocity and I wanted this project to be mutually beneficial. It didn't feel right to me that I would just go somewhere, write about what people were doing, and there wouldn't be anything that would come out of it that would benefit them. Obviously, if I was going to get a degree out of this process, and if I was going to learn something that was deeply important to me, back to that story of my grandmother and this sense of trying to kind of repair my family's legacy, this wasn't a small thing that I was asking of my research partners. So I wanted to think about how I could give back. And when I first heard this term, participatory action research, I realized, oh, there's a whole community of researchers who've been thinking for a long time about how we give back and how we create reciprocal projects. And so I started, learning more about this in my graduate seminars, reading more about it. And mostly the thing that was most helpful, which is why I think this conversation is great, is talking to other researchers, grad students, faculty members, some folks who worked for community organizations who were doing this and how they were applying these principles in their own work. Because what I noticed was the principles are pretty foundational. And it's like agroecology, actually. You have some fundamental principles that you can see in a farming system in Southeast Asia or in Canada or in Peru. But the way it's implemented has everything to do with that context. And I found that to be the case with participatory action research as well, that you started from this question of reciprocity. And then that question by its very nature is so specific to context. And so for me, as I've developed this as a core part of how I work as a researcher, it's kind of like this series of questions I ask myself, and then it leads to a series of questions that I ask my research partners. So, the questions I ask myself are, why am I doing this project? What are my goals? What am I hoping to get out of it? And what do I have to offer? And what's interesting about that last kind of self-reflection question is that that's changed over time. When I was a graduate student and I actually didn't get any funding for my dissertation, what I had to offer is that I was willing to do the dishes. I could help cook for a harvest crew. I could do childcare. And in one case, I took care of some young turkeys. So it was that kind of stuff. And I didn't know if my work would get published. All of those kinds of outcomes, and I was honest with my research partners, were uncertain, but it was really my time that I could offer in reciprocity. Now, as a professor at UC Santa Barbara, I have access to institutional resources. And so I want to be upfront about that. This is what I can offer. These are the resources I have access to, so that my partners and I can think together about what feels right and what feels equitable and appropriate, given what I'm asking and what I have access to and what I have to offer. And then the nature of the projects are different too. So this is a book project that we're mostly talking about today, but just to kind of gesture to the fact that this looks different in different contexts, I also work on article projects, oftentimes with large interdisciplinary teams. And in that case, some of the most compelling things that we have to offer sometimes are things like soil testing. That's a lot more sophisticated than what farmers might have access to on their own budget. And so if they're really interested, for example, in what's happening biologically in their soil, the fact that a member of our team is doing that is compelling. Or in other cases, sometimes it's a smaller scale kind of media-oriented project. And maybe the reciprocity is around somebody who's doing direct marketing, or for other reasons, having that really shareable representation of their work is meaningful. But in this project, a book project, where I started out as a person who had a job as a professor at a university, the kind of core things that I thought about from the beginning, once we started having conversations around reciprocity, was paying people for their time, acknowledging that people's time doing interviews or reviewing manuscripts eventually is valuable. So that was a big piece of it. Something I always do in my writing projects is that if I'm writing anything about someone, even if it's not a direct quote, but if I'm representing someone and I'm using their name, if it's not an anonymized project, I always send them the material first. And it doesn't move anywhere until they have time to look at it. And also talking to my publisher about what that means to build in that kind of time if somebody's like farming or running a program. And then also doing the same thing with what comes next, with presentations, with media. We all had a conversation, and again, folks featured in the book were compensated for this, about how they wanted to handle media opportunities, speaking opportunities. One result of that conversation is on my website. If you go to lizcarlisle.com and you click on speaking inquiries, you'll see the kind of protocol that we developed around basically trying to direct paid speaking opportunities towards the people featured in the book rather than towards me. So a lot of kind of discussing essentially in this back and forth about what are our goals, what are we all looking for, and what do we have to offer, really thinking about how to make sure that the project is mutually beneficial and that the benefits are really tailored to the goals and interests of the people who are collaborating with me. So it looks different for each of the women who are featured in Healing Grounds because they're all pursuing their own goals. They are all running their own organizations. So some people are interested in speaking opportunities. Some people are interested in media, other kinds of things, but just keeping that conversation open about how does this project benefit all of us.
Thank you, Liz. And we were especially interested in this question as it relates to Indigenous communities and Indigenous knowledge. Did you follow any particular methods or approaches to be sure to respect and not appropriate any forms of Indigenous knowledge?
Yeah, and I have to say, I come to this whole conversation really humbly. I don't see myself as an expert on participatory action research or, being an ally. This isn't like the primary focus of my training. It's just a very necessary thing to continue to learn about, I think, in order for me to be successful in my work as an agroecologist. So I'm learning alongside all of you. I think, so in Healing Grounds, there are 4 women who are featured, and their stories are centered in each of the major chapters. And then their personal story and their work becomes this vehicle also to talk about these communities that they're all coming from and the deep legacy in the Indigenous North American community, in the Black community, in the Latinx community, in the Asian American community of regenerative agriculture. So there was kind of 2 elements to thinking about how I was working with knowledge and being respectful, the people that I was speaking to sort of contemporaneously, and then also all of that material that I was quoting and citing. With quoting and citing, thinking really carefully about who I was citing, making sure that when I was talking about Indigenous knowledge, that I was citing Indigenous scholars and not just non-Indigenous scholars writing about those practices. So that was a piece of it. And then, especially in the case of, and even in just kind of structuring the book, making sure that the Indigenous knowledge or the native plants or the practices were never disconnected from the people who are the developers of those practices and whose ongoing land sovereignty struggles are deeply interwoven with the viability of these practices going forward and the success of regenerative agriculture. So in that first chapter, really centering Latrice Tatsey, as a whole human being who's a researcher who works on buffalo restoration and regenerative grazing for both buffalo and cattle, and her whole story around, the Blackfeet Nation struggle to reclaim all of the territory that they need to in order for this buffalo restoration to be successful on ecological terms. I think that's really central, and that's something I hear a lot from Indigenous colleagues that's frustrating, is that there's often this move to extract the knowledge or fetishize the native plants, for example, or the practices without centering the people and everything that they need justice-wise in order to actually be able to do these practices, continue these practices, and for all of us to benefit from that land stewardship that they are struggling to be able to continue.
Thank you. And just to follow up on that, what were some of the challenges and struggles that you encountered in trying to do this work in a respectful way?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges that I found in doing participatory action research in general, and this project included, is that the people who really need to be heard, who are the experts because they are on the front lines and they are doing the work, are busy because they are doing the work. And so I think for us as researchers, it's challenging because we face time pressures in our institutions, right? No doubt about it. And so it's easy to think about, like, who can I get an answer from quickly if I need a quote or if I need someone to review this passage that I've written. And so I think the most challenging part for me oftentimes is trying to square those different time frameworks of academia, which is in a hurry, the publishing industry, which is often in a hurry, and people in communities who are doing the work and have direct knowledge of their experiences and the knowledge traditions that they're carrying on, and finding ways to carve the time to be patient. I think that is in some ways the biggest kind of contradiction that often arises in my work. and trying to explain to colleagues in the university system and trying to be creative about how do I build in the time it really takes. If I really want to like have 5 months to potentially do this interview and put out an email to somebody saying, truly like when you have a moment, when you truly have a moment, I would love to talk to you, rather than I think the norms in our professional environments, whether it's journalism, extension in some cases, faculty culture is like, can you get back to me within 2 weeks? And for those of you out there, who run agricultural operations or maybe nonprofit organizations, that like, if it's harvest season or you've got your big annual event coming up or it's budget season or something like that, you can't get back to a researcher within 2 weeks. And I think, also acknowledging as researchers that oftentimes the project that's near and dear to our heart is not the top priority for the collaborator. And so if we're, going to be a good collaborator, we have to acknowledge that especially the folks who have incredible integrity around this, their first priority is doing the work, not talking about it or being on a podcast about it. So I think, finding ways to be patient and have all these kind of colliding institutions somehow align with that time that it really takes.
So when you first approached people to be part of your book, I'm curious to know what they told you they thought the challenges and benefits would be, how they explained that to you, and then whether that's actually what happened and whether there were any surprises.
Yeah. Well, I made an explicit choice with this book that the primary people featured are all people who already have their own platform. And that was another of these choices around, trying to think about power relationships. I didn't want my narrative about my sense of the significance of these people's work or the way I was framing it to in any way overshadow their own narratives. And so these are all people who are already on podcasts and giving talks. And so in a sense, this book didn't really add a whole lot of value in terms of their exposure or the public's awareness of their work and the importance of it. I think something that was interesting and continues to be interesting to folks is meeting each other, and whether this book can be a vehicle for that kind of horizontal peer relationships and sort of sharing, sharing experiences with each other, and also just kind of the sort of solidarity of, it's still challenging, I think, to be an Indigenous person or a person of color in the regenerative agriculture movement, depending on where you are or the kind of space you're in. All these people sometimes have experiences of being the only one. And so to connect with each other, around that, I think has been something people are excited about and excited to use their own kind of platform and star power to help shine it back on the other people who are featured in this work. And I think, beyond that, I think it's also been interesting just for people to reflect together about the kind of larger meaning of the work that we're all doing. And I think that's something that we have the privilege as researchers of that time for reflection and putting things in context and to combine sort of what we experience and what we read and reflect back to the collaborators and practitioners that we work with, some of that context and that significance. That was a really fun part for me. And I think maybe it was also exciting for some of the folks in this book. But definitely for me, because narrative nonfiction projects are my primary form of scholarship, sometimes I do these big article projects that are interdisciplinary, but part of being honest and being humble is knowing that the type of work that I do is really only so valuable to my partners. And so that's where, thinking about other kinds of benefits that aren't the work itself, and what reciprocity really looks like is important. And so for me, the relationship is really at the center of all of it. And from the folks I work with in Lenel Underground to Bob Quinn to the folks in this book, for me, it's a lifetime commitment that I'm interested in the success of every single one of these people. And if there's ever anything I can do, a letter of recommendation I can write, a letter of support when somebody's writing a grant, if somebody's looking at their, next educational step or something. So yeah, being open to those kinds of mutual benefits that are maybe outside, the scope of the project, quote unquote.
Well, thank you, Liz. Before we move into general questions and answers, is there anything else you'd like to add or reflect on that we didn't cover yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a great conversation. I'm super interested in folks' questions. So I think we can just go straight there. Yeah, and I loved your questions. So thank you for those. I know you have incredible experience in this arena too. So for folks who have access to talking to Marcia on a regular basis, you should definitely pick her brain on these things too.
Well, thank you, Liz. So we would like to open this up. We've reserved about 15 minutes for questions and answers from the participants in this call, or we call it a hub because we like it to be interactive. And I think we can take questions, we can monitor the chat, or you can raise your hand. Kate, I don't know if you want to move it back to the gallery view so that we can see if anyone has their hand up.
Yep, 1 second, I'll do that. And we can also, we do have one question already in the chat box to start us off from Steve. And Steve Kreider, would you like to unmute and share your question?
Yes, I'd love to. First, I'm just a big fan of your books. I've read them all. Lentil Underground. I used to do business with those lentil and wheat folks and out there, and then Senator Tester lobbying for organic and NOSB and Farm Bill and all that good stuff. And Bob Quinn's an old friend. So my first question is just an appreciation of, especially some of my age who's been around in organic since the 70s, that you highlighted in your book both Farmers of 40 Centuries and Agricultural Testament, which are really fundamental texts for those of us in the organic world. And both of those authors, I thought, really showed a kind of sensitivity to the cultures and appreciation that, like, we've got so much to learn from these people, and that element has been part of the organic movement for a long, long time and lost and found. But those two works really kind of, in a surprising way, reflect that the attitude that we're bringing forward today and highlighting the need for. My other question, though, that's more of a comment. Can you speak about how, I mean, your new book is really important in how it highlights how regen ag is not acknowledging the roots, and this is a runaway marketing claim now that, I mean, can you speak to that? I mean, you're kind of grounding it back to, wait a minute, it's already being, regen is already being co-opted in many ways by some really bad players. And so that dynamic between the marketplace wanting to run with this versus the people who help create all this, who are not going to derive a benefit from the marketing of regen ag as the new savior of the planet, and buy this product, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky sometimes when there's a new term out there to figure out how to navigate it. When I first started, working on the Lentil Underground project in Montana and talking a lot about soil health and how you build it with these folks in Montana, that term wasn't one I was aware of. And then interestingly, people started talking about my book as being a book about regenerative agriculture when the term kind of got going a couple of years after the book came out. And so I was just kind of invited into, panels about it or whatever it wasn't like something I intentionally decided is like, I'm going to go check out regenerative agriculture. It was like, a few people already think that I have something to say about this. So I'm just going to show up and see what they think this word means, And what I like about it is the word regeneration. I heard that word and I thought, yes, I'm interested in regeneration. And I did have experiences, like you mentioned, Steve, where I heard, a claim being made by a company marketing a product. And my reflection sometimes was, they're not doing regeneration. Regeneration is profound. That term, calls us to ask what's broken, why, and what do we really need to do to fix it? And so that's why in this book, I wanted to take that perspective of the last 400, 500 years and ground our understanding of why we have an extractive agriculture in colonial processes, in the plantation system, in, genocide and dispossession of indigenous peoples, and understand, like, if we're going to regenerate, we need to understand that those are the roots of this extractive food system. We need to understand that, regeneration was a principle of indigenous food systems around the world, prior to this, extractive logic that went hand in hand with colonial processes. And justice for people and a reimagining of our relationship with land and with each other is what regeneration really takes. And yes, it will involve cover cropping, and it will involve regenerative grazing, and it will involve more perennial plants. But there is no pathway to having those things at the scale we need them without changing our society's relationship with land and with each other. And so if we really care about this stuff, and we really do want to, draw down lots and lots of greenhouse gases through bringing carbon back down into the soil where it belongs, we have to get serious about changes in the structure of our food and agriculture system.
Maria, you have your hand up. Do you want to go next? There we go. Hold on one sec, Maria. I think we still can't hear you.
Are you connected to a headset or anything? Because it doesn't look like you're on mute. That's what always happens to me. Somehow my sound is always getting redirected to some other device.
And feel free, it looks like you're already on it, but feel free to add it into the chat and we can read it out. Okay, no problem. Other questions, if anyone wants to add one to the chat box, or also feel free to raise your hand up or unmute. And we've got, I like Christina's in the chat adding in the new word that she heard today, regeneration. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Phil, we've got one from Phil who added it in. It sounds like 400 years of colonial degenerative ag were actually just the result of scaling up from small village ag to regional. So maybe listening to indigenous experts would just lead us to scale back down. Thoughts, Liz? And then we'll go to you next, Maria.
I think that's really insightful. I think we definitely see this concentration of land and power and capital in the food system in the hands of fewer and fewer people as part, sort of what got kicked off by colonial processes, then supercharged by industrial processes, and then like supercharged again by the financialization of agriculture. So I think changing that relationship and that ratio around people and land so that essentially like everyone has agency with respect to our collective stewardship of land. And I think in some cases that would go beyond even thinking about farms in the way that we often do through the kind of only property model that we really see very commonly in the United States. But I'm inspired by farm collectives and other kinds of entities that are thinking about how do lots and lots of people have agency over the span of land where we would often in our contemporary food system just see one owner who's essentially the decision-making person. And certainly in our conversations around agroecology, we know that it's knowledge intensive and it's management intensive, and monitoring is really important. Our distribution systems rely on, if we want to have less waste, we need more people engaged in that too. So I think you're absolutely right that, just having 1 to 2% of the population farming and having agricultural land super concentrated isn't going to work if we want to have reciprocal relationships with land and to really be managing for ecosystem services and the kinds of mutual benefits that we're all hoping for when we use terms like regeneration and organic.
Thanks so much. Maria, go ahead.
Sorry about that. Hi. Hey, thank you so much for putting this on. I really appreciate it. So I have a question around community food assessments. I'm getting ready to embark upon one for Okanagan region in the hopes to have Colville Reservation participation as well. I'm kind of working on that right now and getting all the stakeholders together. How do I use a participatory action research in a food assessment in a way that it's impactful for funders? You know, because I think a lot of times in like writing grants and stuff like that, I'm new to all of this, brand new, but you know, having some statistics and numbers and percentages seems to be something that really helps tell that story when applying for funding. And to me, what is the most powerful is really, you know, hearing those stories, you know, from the people who actually need the money. And so what I would like to do is try and do this assessment so that way the money can get into the hands of the people who actually need it. How do I, if you have any recommendations on the best way to utilize this tool for an assessment?
Yeah, that sounds amazing, and more power to you. I haven't worked directly on a community food assessment, but my first thought would be to ask other people who have and who've tried, you know, to use a deeply participatory approach, which I think is kind of hopefully baked into the nature of a community food assessment. I'm originally from Missoula, Montana. That community has done some amazing work. Neva Hassanin at University of Montana, Josh Schlotnick, who previously taught at the campus farm at University of Montana and is now a county commissioner in Missoula. That's kind of actually an exciting progression because, gosh, at this point, you know, like 20 years ago, Neva and Josh were part of a large community effort to write kind of a community food systems plan, basically, as starting with an assessment and then sort of like, okay, we've seen what we've got. How do we get to where we want to go? And there was a lot of county policy that they realized needed to shift. And ultimately, Josh, who did not have a political background, decided he was going to run for county commissioner, and this whole group of people who'd been involved in the community food systems assessment got behind that campaign and did a ton of the organizing to get him successfully elected to that position. But I would say that Missoula team, out of the primary nonprofit at the center of that work in Missoula is CFAC, Community Food AC. And those are a couple of the individuals that have been involved in that ongoing effort. And there is a really cool process here playing out in Santa Barbara, where I am now as well. More or less my predecessor, it wasn't exactly organized that way. They don't replace faculty one-to-one, but an amazing food systems professor who inspired generations of students and who retired just before I got here, David Cleveland, was at the center of a community food assessment. And I believe the way they bounded that was Santa Barbara County, which is really interesting because similar story, the federally recognized Santa Ynez Band of the Chumash people are encompassed within Santa Barbara County, although of course they have a government to government relationship with the federal government as well. And you know, the North Santa Barbara County is very, very different economically, culturally, demographically, politically, socially than Southern Santa Barbara County, where the university is located in the city of Goleta and Santa Barbara. And that plan took the shape of a nonprofit that now that there's been an assessment and goals were set, now there's a nonprofit that's trying to, you know, create an ongoing network to achieve those goals. So that's a long way of saying I would ask the people who have done this. Those are a few that I know who I would definitely ask if I was taking this on and trying to think about how to make it as participatory and compelling to funders as possible, because those projects did get funded and have been funded on an ongoing basis to try to actually realize some of the dreams that came out of the planning process.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Liz. We are coming up on time, and I know Liz actually has to dash and teach class on the farm right after this. So we want to make sure we honor your time and everyone else's as well. We appreciate your time here today. We have a few last announcements, and including the book drawing that we'll do coming up next. We've got some resources being shared. I shared a resource on participatory action research that Marcia has shared with us, so you can check that out. And we will also have all of this, including the link shared in the chat, available on our YouTube channel. So, and that link from Food Systems. Liz, thank you so much for your time. If you need to head off to class, feel free at any time, and we'll turn it over to Christina for the raffle. And thank you again, Liz, for sharing today with us.
Thank you so much. Truly my pleasure. Thanks for your awesome questions, everybody.
Okay, can you see my wheel?
Yes.
Okay.
We can.
Oh my gosh, technology. All right, I'm just going to shuffle this. I think since I put the list, a couple of people have left. And even now, maybe some people have left, but I'm just going to do this really quickly. I'm just gonna select one person. Okay. Seems like Carter Hick. Carter Hick, are you still in the call?
Yes, I am. I am still here.
Oh, wonderful. So yeah, you're the winner. Could you please, through a private message, send me your address so I can make sure to mail you the book?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. I love all of her books, so this will be great.
Nice. Yeah, thank you.
Congratulations, Carter. And thanks everyone for being on the call today. Want to remind everyone that our next, let's see. Here we go. Yep, there we go. Our next hub call is on Wednesday, May 17th. And that will be with Linda McLean from the Colville Reservation and WSU Extension, continuing discussions around participatory action research. And wanted to also share out of our WSU Food Systems program in collaboration with Tilth Alliance. You are the first to hear, actually. We're about to release our season schedule for farm walks coming up. And that's farmer to farmer education that we've been doing with Tilth Alliance since 2004, highlighting different farms around Washington, organic, sustainable, innovative farms. And our next one will be May 22nd, a month from now, at Hyaton Cider Works. And we'll get to see both apple production and cider production. So there'll be 2 stops for this farm business. And in the meanwhile, until our next hub call, hopefully you all will join for that. Just a reminder, we do have, these are a few ways to engage. We do have our foodsystems.news@wsu.edu set up. If you've got an event coming up or something you'd like to share in our newsletter, send it to there. And then a reminder to sign up from our website if you're not already on it for the Washington, the WFFR, the Washington Family Farming Resources listserv. So we'll put the links in there. And thank you all again for being on our call today. And thank you, Liz. Thanks to the students. We'll stay on for just a few moments if anyone has other questions, but otherwise, thanks everyone. Take care and happy spring.
And thank you for the resources in the chat. We will save a copy of the chat and make those resources available. Thanks, everybody. Great to see you all. And please come back next month. Enjoy your book, Carter. It's great.
That's great. Excellent. Yeah, thanks, everyone. Yeah, any remaining questions or thoughts before we sign off?
Hi, may I ask one more random
Yeah,
question?
go ahead.
So with this food assessment project that I'm working on within the Okanagan community and hopefully Carlisle Reservation as well, I'm trying to find a way to identify our area that everyone can identify with, because I don't know for sure, like I really need to check with some tribal members, but I assume that they don't identify with Okanagan as being the area. And so I was thinking about, exploring with the Food System Roundtable group of